If you want to go ahead and start the slides. And next slide. So we are so glad that all of you are here this afternoon. It's hard to follow the federal updates because it's such an amazing session, but we'll try to make this one as amazing as well. There is just so much going on in the research security space. We had a really hard time picking with our panelists the topics that we thought you would like to hear about. So we've talked about some of the ones that you've seen up here. For example, we know that everybody's really interested in how that very first cycle of the NSF Foreign Financial Disclosure Report went and how that worked for everyone. We know that everyone's very interested in the implementation of the final research security standards and the rollout of the NSF-funded Center, which you'll also hear more about separately. But beyond that, in addition to just conversing with our panelists on this, we went out to the Foreign Influence Working Group and we asked them, what burning questions do you have, or what topics do you think you would like to hear more about? And then we went ahead and sent all those questions to our panelists so they could incorporate those into their comments this afternoon. And once again, we have been blessed with our amazing favorite federal representatives for this panel, with great representation with Sarah and Jean from NSF, Michelle, of course, from NIH, Julie Anderson from DOE, who's now she came back, right, which was really encouraging, and happy to have her now be a new standard for DOE because she's so wonderful with it. And of course, Bindu Nair. So very nice to have all of you here. We have basically a lot to tell you. Next slide. Jim, you want to tell us what's happened since the last meeting? Yeah.
Thanks, Pamela. Pamela and I have created a version of this slide, I think, for each of a handful of meetings. And it always takes a little bit of time to cull down the hot topics and hit the ones that we think are most critical to this group. And I'm going to hit the highlights of this, but most, if not all of them, will be addressed by the panelists. So I'm not going to go into the details. Obviously, Pamela just mentioned the guidelines for the research security programs. If you remember, it was a year ago that the Federal Register notice came out from OSTP asking for input on this, and the new standards have changed in some somewhat substantive ways. So that's exciting to see that. I would point out that this is guidance to the agencies. This is not guidance to us. So there'll be a lot of discussion about how the agencies interpret it and where they go from there. The second thing I want to note, and I think Michelle will probably talk about this, is the decision matrix communication that just came out in August. If you haven't taken a look at the accompanying blog post by Dr. Lauer, highly encourage you to take a look at that. It's explanatory. It goes through some of the allowable activities like writing letters for related to related to international students, sitting on international peer review panels, and other things that have been confusing to faculty. So it's a really good clarification of some of those activities. The third item there relates to the SECURE grant, which I assume Sarah and Jean may talk about. At least hit the highlights of that, but that's really exciting. And there's a full session of that tomorrow, as noted on here, tomorrow at 2:20 Eastern Standard Time. And it'll go into the details of the two pieces of the award, the SVE and the Secure Analytics, what they are, who's on those awards, and so forth. Really exciting stuff. The fourth item I wanted to mention was related to an NSF training survey. I point this out because I received this email at Yale, and I wasn't sure if it was a real email, a real survey, because, Sarah, it came from, I wrote this down, it came from the IDA Science and Technology Policy Institute. So I would encourage you, if anybody at your institution gets these, it looks like it's addressed to VPRs, compliance officers. I think that's why I got it at Yale, as well as other administrators. Highly encourage you to take a look at this survey. It's a brief survey. It takes about 10 minutes, but I would imagine, Sarah, if you can talk about the importance of that when you get to that point, that would be wonderful. Pamela just mentioned the Foreign Financial Disclosure Report portal. I won't mention that because I'm sure Sarah will. The sixth one there was a GAO report that came out that has recommendations to OSP on a number of different areas. There's a couple of related to science and security. I bring that up because we all know many of the things that eventually filter down to us start at the GAO, then they go to OSTP, OMB agencies, and eventually they filter down to us. So it's important to understand those types of things. And then lastly, in 2021, I don't know that I noted it, but DOJ announced the creation of a civil cyber fraud unit in 2021. Again, I don't even know that I noticed it at the time, but what is important now, and there's a link here, that one of our peer universities, they're probably here attending this, the DOJ is actually bringing a key tam suit against them related to alleging that the university failed to meet certain cyber security requirements in the performance of its DoD contracts. So again, over the last 5 years, the role of the enforcement branch, the FBI and DOJ, has been up and down. Many of the things that we think about as administrators are administrative or operational oversight. In some cases, they're deemed as criminal activity, and in this case, for example, the DOJ is getting involved. So I think it's just important to note not only the importance of complying with the terms and conditions of your grants and contracts, but also that these types of things are sometimes issues that justice and others take note of. Pamela, back to you.
Thanks, Jim. Next slide. So, as much as has changed over these last few months, it's continuing to change. And I think one of the very big things that none of us really is too sure about is how the November election outcome will impact the requirements that we're facing, and even legislation that's currently happening now, to see whether it actually comes to fruition and what the impact will be on the research environment. I'm just going to mention one thing here about that, and that is last week the House of Representatives passed the Biosecure Act during what they were calling China Week, where they passed a lot of legislation about how we do business with China. And of course, now that goes on to the Senate. So we still don't know, of course, whether that would move forward or move forward in its current iteration. But this is a piece of legislation that would prohibit federal funding for equipment or services related or provided by a biotechnology company of concern. And that includes certain named companies, but it also includes companies that are controlled by a foreign country of concern that we're used to dealing with. And so it's a little unclear about how that potentially would impact us, but it could be a very potential significant impact should it come to pass. So I would say just, again, try to keep track of what's going on, and we'll try to help with that as well in terms of what continues to roll out, both in terms of these things that we anticipate and expect and are just waiting for final refinements on, as well as new surprises that come our way. But we want to spend most of our time today with our amazing panelists. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Bowles. Next slide. And to hear from NIH's perspective. Thanks, Michelle, for joining.
Thank you for having me always. All right, next slide, please. Next slide. We're going to talk about the common forms and the implementation plan that NIH submitted to the OSTP back in May. We are actually in full throttle of implementing our plan, effective for all applications in RPPR submitted for due dates on or after May 25th, 2025. We are going to be implementing the common forms without any changes to the collection fields. We are completely committed, and I think we've talked a lot about this in the past, that we wanted to make sure that our harmonization efforts, along with NSF and some of our other federal partners, was true to plan. And so that is the plan. NIH will continue, though, to collect 3 required agency-specific data elements, and that's merely because they are a requirement within our peer review regulations. And that will be the personal statement, contributions to science, and honors to assess qualifications. What we do plan to do, though, however, is to begin to look at these the different titles within the common forms and see how we can implement these 3 areas within the common forms and not change the titles, and really continue to integrate and migrate into the full common forms. The data collections and the data elements that we are going to be collecting separately will be separate from the common forms, and it'll be on our new BioSketch supplementation attachment. Next slide. And so NIH will require the use of Science CV. This is not anything new. We've been talking about that, aligning ourselves with, again, our colleagues from across the other federal research platforms. And we will be doing that as we implement the common forms. We're going to require that the BioSketch produce the digital certified PDFs for use in the application submission. NIH, of course, will require all senior key personnel to enter their ORCID ID into Science CV and in the personal identifier space section of the common forms. We've talked a lot over the last year or so about the fact that NIH will require this link in their ORCID ID to the ERA Commons profile, personal profile, just to make sure that we continue to have a seamless approach for our grant systems, our commons for our recipients, and as well as the recipients and NIH staff. And then, of course, we will also, information on the linking to the ORCID ID can be found on the ORCID ID topic in the ERA Commons online help. ERA is committed to making sure that we provide detailed instructions, and they will have the help desk on tap to help our applicants and our recipients. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about research security. And so for the Malign Foreign Talent Recruitment Program Prohibition, NIH's implementation will be the same as what's required, of course, in the OSTP guidelines for the federal agencies. The covered individuals are prohibited from participating in any federally funded research and development projects. So that's, of course, applicable to NIH, and NIH will make sure that the certification is captured on the common form or implementing that piece of the common form, as well as the BioSketch. We will not be changing that, and we will incorporate that requirement into our next iteration of the NIH grants policy statement, making certain that our applicants and our recipients know that NIH is implementing this piece for the Malign Foreign Talent Recruitment Program of the common form, and for the BioSketch and current pending other support. Next slide. So for our research security guidelines, and I just talked a lot about our implementation. We talked about what's required in the OSTP research security guidelines. And as you all know, it's the research security export controls, cybersecurity, and then foreign travel. And so that's a planning implementation. We're planning implementation for the research security piece, and of course for the export controls internally. The cybersecurity is pending the development from the NIST guidance, so it's not much that NIH can do with that. And then, of course, pending the foreign travel security is pending development for other federal resources. So we will continue to keep a close eye on that as well, and working with our colleagues. NIH continues to participate with OSP and other research partners in the discussions on streamlining the implementation of the certification requirements. And more information on that implementation will be coming in the next several months, not necessarily delivered by NIH, but of course from others. Next slide. So the only thing that I did want to mention that's not in my slide deck, but of course our good friend Jim Luther mentioned about how Mike Lauer put in the Nexus, the NIH decision matrix, which further clarifies the processes that NIH uses for handling allegations for foreign interference. And NIH thought that it would be important. I truly encourage you all to go out, take a look at the matrix, and it's on his on the Nexus website. I really encourage you to take a look at it, because what it does is it shows that NIH does have a method to its madness, right? We are very much wedded to providing a internal and external transparency for how we are reviewing the foreign interference cases. And we will say that, you know, as all of us started off in the initial stages, we've begun to build upon the internal processes. And so we have our research integrity unit. Dr. Patricia Valdez worked with Dr. Lauer very closely to pull together this matrix and worked and got input from OPERA, which is the organization that I lead. And so we have really been excited about being able to clearly articulate what processes that we use to show that we're not targeting any individual organizations or other types of individuals. We want to make sure that we are transparent in the fact that we look at the cases. The cases have specific challenges, and we try to apply our internal policies and our grant policies as well as regulations to those cases. So I do encourage you to take a look at it. And of course, if you have any questions, Dr. Lauer would be happy to answer them directly, I'm certain. Feel free to reach out to Dr. Patricia Valdez, as well as myself and or Kristen Ta. I am going to turn it over to Pam. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. I think with that, we will move forward and hear from NSF. Sarah, are you starting? So, or is Jean?
Jean's going to kick it off.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
I'm going to kick it off. So, hello again, everyone. I felt like I was just on, and I was.
You were.
So now we're going to be talking about foreign influence, and NSF has a brief update like the other agencies. Next slide, please. So this is Sarah Stalker-Lehoux and myself that are going to be tag teaming this for NSF and walking through some topical areas that we think will be of interest to you. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned multiple times, folks said, oh, we're going to give an update on FFDR, and we're certainly going to give a very brief update on FFDR, but really, and much of it you've kind of seen before, but I'm going to hone in on some really important points and really lessons learned that we have found throughout this process. And for me to start, probably the biggest thing I have to emphasize is to thank you, the community. Number one, for your patience. Number two, for your great asking of questions that helped us understand, okay, here, this may not be as clear as we thought. And so we cannot emphasize enough the importance of what we considered to be a collaboration with the recipient community in making this first report happen. So thank you very much. Next slide. So since we have 399 people on, there are, I think there may need to be another button pressed. There we go. So 10339B, Chips and Science Act, had a requirement for NSF to gather information on foreign financial transactions and gifts. The left, I'm not going to read it to you because I believe you've seen it all before. I think the really important emphasis on this slide or on the left slide is a very big lesson learned for us, and that was to go with the statute. And the statute says all current financial support, the value of which is 50K or more, including contracts received directly and indirectly from a foreign source, which is associated with a foreign country of concern. And we really went back through this process and honed on every word of that and foot stomped the received directly or indirectly as part of our implementation. And we didn't initially start out that way. And so that's an important point I want to make. We also had a due date of July 31st. The reporting period was July 1st, 2023 to June 30, 2024. We realized after talking to the community, after talking to research administration societies, that it would be beneficial for us to extend that date, which we did. So reports were due September 3rd of 2024. Another important point to emphasize is that in the PAP guide, as originally issued, we had language which we thought you appreciated on tuition payment, which basically exempted tuition in certain scenarios if it was for specific students, for a parent payment for a child or children or other relatives. Then we went on with some additional language. We have tightened this up to have it now state, however, if a tuition payment is received from a foreign source in the form of a grant, scholarship, or other form of financial aid, the payment is reportable if the $50,000 threshold is met. So we did clarify that language in the very recent past in our FAQs. Next slide, please. So the FFDR post-award requirements, most of this is exactly as we have stated in prior reports. What I really want to emphasize on this slide is very much the fact that we were very in close communication, as I started with when I started this presentation, with the community. And I think that as a result of that, these requirements, we basically made it very clear in our communications at the end: submit the report, do your very, very best, and feel comfortable that what you submitted is accurate, current, and complete. And we believe we honed in on that part. And that's the part I really wanted to emphasize on this slide. Next slide, please. So here's some results from September 13th, showing exactly what happened. Well, first of all, there were 418 disclosures submitted. 99 institutions of higher education reported gifts or contracts with foreign countries of concern. There were 793 gifts and contracts disclosed. 200 million total value of gifts and contracts. I do want to hone in on the fact that this last statement of 12 required disclosures were not submitted. So if you happen to be one of those organizations that did not submit, we do know who you are, and we would very much appreciate your submitting that report to us. We also noted that there were more disclosures submitted than were required. So thank you very much to those institutions. We did not turn them away, even though you were not required to, but we found that a very important lesson learned. Next slide, please. And then finally, some outstanding topics that we just want to emphasize. Again, We listen, we listen, we listen. And we're working on the language, as I mentioned in the last session, for the 2025 PAP guide. And you will find that we're beefing up this section in Chapter 7 of the PAP guide quite significantly by adding lots of definitions, by adding clarity to pieces that were not maybe as clear as they could have been before. And so we absolutely do continue to monitor the feedback from the research community. We're also looking very closely, many thanks to the organizations and individuals. We asked for, okay, if July 31st does not work, and we initially heard that, and now we're not hearing it as much, but we're trying to figure out what that date might be. We want to do whatever date really does work best in terms of the institution's reporting of expenditures so that we make sure that you can feel very comfortable with the information that you are submitting. Obviously, we are also, as I mentioned, looking closely at the PAP guide requirements. And we do plan, even though there are not significant changes, but there are some as a result of the lessons learned and the FAQs we answered. So we will be putting a listing of the revised data elements again in this version of the PAP guide so that you have an opportunity to comment again. Now, there will be many of you who will say as part of this process, wow, Department of Education in their 117 reporting does X and you do Y. That is really one of the biggest lessons learned, that they had different statutes they were following than we did. Our language was different than theirs. And so you may find that there are circumstances in this next issuance of data elements where you will find nuances and differences between how we respond and how the Department of Education does for their 117 reporting. We already have some expanded FAQs. We held back in releasing them because we felt like that's just going to confuse you in terms of what you're reporting for that September 3rd date. But we already do have a great set of additional FAQs. And we definitely also will be looking at the research.gov system. We've received a lot of feedback on places that could be improved or functionality you'd like to see. And so we will be taking a very, very close look at that as well. Next slide. We have had 2 webinars. There is a link to it here. We've also had a session for just FAQs only. Those were action-packed. I mean, for something that may seem incredibly boring, there was a lot of amazing questions and a huge amount of interest. So there is a link in the presentation to the actual recording and the presentation itself. Next slide. And we have a lot of training, as many other agencies are pointing out in their presentations, a lot of resources. And I think those are instrumental in helping you understand the system. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and she's going to cover some of the other research security topics. Over to you.
Thanks, Jean. And I really do want to echo Jean's thanks to the community. This was a lot more of an undertaking than Jean and I had expected. We were, I mean, again, working very closely with Department of Education, trying to sync things up, et cetera, but really getting down, to the time of implementation, realizing that there were unique things about our legislative requirements that were just different. And there were some areas where we just had to diverge from the interpretation and legislative requirements for Section 117 versus ours under the CHIPS and Science Act. So anyway, just very much appreciate all of your patience with that. And yeah, it'll be, I mean, quite a few folks have submitted, so that is great news. And again, this whole next year will be, thinking about, as Gina said, we're already doing all of those PAPG updates. So, we're definitely going to be taking in some lessons learned. So very quickly today, I'll just give you a few updates. We can go to the next slide, please. As you all know, of course, the OSTP issued the Research Security Program Guidelines on July 9th. I know that these were long awaited by the community. Again, identifying 4 pillars, which were already quite familiar to those of you in the research community, but providing a bit more specificity in a few of these areas. I won't go through these verbatim, but I will just highlight that there was a lot of discussion that went into these. And we also acknowledge that the community is still waiting for a lot of information related to these 4 elements. While there is a timeline set out in the OSTP memo that federal agencies have to submit to OSTP and OMB, plans for updating our policies, reflecting these new research security program requirements within 6 months, and then 6 months thereafter, the final plans, it will be taking effect. And then 18 months thereafter, all covered institutions have to be putting in place their programs. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, because as we have learned in many areas, sometimes implementation does take a little bit longer, and I'll walk you through some of those issues. So cybersecurity, working with NIST, there is the fantastic 8481 that has been issued, but still working with NIST on providing clarity on those cybersecurity requirements for the RSPS. And then foreign travel, specifically, that now has 2 components. Specifically, a periodic training is required for covered individuals that are engaged in that international travel within 1 year after that training resource is made available. As you can all imagine, we're working hard on that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. The research security training resembles, I think, very much what it looked like in the last version. And then, of course, the export control training element, 2 options for the community, specifically taking training that is already administered by the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security, and State Department's Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, or just making sure that that training complies with the expectations of U.S. export controls and compliance requirements, and also specifically reviewing foreign sponsors, collaborators, and partnerships. Next slide, please. So, as usual, we're really working hard and putting our heads together on this implementation. Working with OSTP, the research funding agencies are coordinating on various aspects. To include, I think one of the most challenging is the central certification system for all of you in the community. We do not want all these institutions submitting different research security program standards to different research funding agencies. We know how much of a headache this will be and the challenges that will accompany that. So we are working together to figure out how we can harmonize that certification and specifically the research security program requirements across the research funding agencies. This is in train right now. We've had many discussions, and OSTP is in support of the process that we're looking at. So hope to have news about maybe next steps related to that somewhat soon. Foreign travel training requirement, as I mentioned, we don't want to, we're not expecting the community to comply with this until we provide a resource to the community. Very similar to the research security training, we are looking at the potential development of a module. So more to come on that very soon. Cybersecurity, already mentioned, coordinating with NIST on this, providing additional guidance with the 8481, knowing that there's still some questions, but that is, we're really working with NIST on that to provide additional clarity to the community. We also know that there's some questions about when do you meet the threshold of a covered institution? Of course, the research security program standard requirements are only required for those institutions that receive 50 million or more over the consecutive years. And there are questions about who and when that threshold is met. We're working with the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, NCSCS. We want to leverage their annual survey, trying to figure out what resources we can provide to the community on that. And of course, those institutions that do not meet the actual requirement and the 50 million threshold to put those in place, we of course are encouraging other institutions to leverage the resources that are available and do what they can to implement some best practices and put things in place. It looks like there's a little bit of an error, like a formatting error here, but the last thing I do want to say is the implementation timeline. As I alluded to, and as this slide kind of outlines, there's quite a few things that we're still working through, and we realize that we need to provide to all of you in the community. So we have been in discussions with OSTP on the timeline, and really for 6 months, for agencies to get this information, the policy to OSTP within 6 months is is really not completely realistic for us right now, since we are really coordinating still on what will we do for the central certification system. A lot of options have been on the table. A lot have been explored and discussed already. We had high hopes that it would be an easy fix, and unfortunately it wasn't. So we are working together to see how we can just coordinate amongst ourselves and have one agency kind of serve to be that central certification system. Next slide, please. As Jim mentioned, a lot happening on the NSF front. Really phenomenally, July 24th, we announced the 5-year, $67 million investment establishing our new SECURE Center and Secure Analytics. 50 million of that going to the University of Washington, led by Mark Hasselkorn, the PI, and then 17 million to Texas A&M, led by PI Kevin Gamache. Really excited. I know we've been talking about this for so long, but these awards have been made. We're just so excited. They had a kickoff meeting last week. And really what this is going to look like, there's a lot to say, and I'm not going to say too much because I don't want to do a spoiler alert, because there is a panel, as Jim mentioned, tomorrow at 2:20 on this. So please just attend that. But really, it's just going to have so much potential, exponentially provide support to the community, helping all of you, developing best practices, training. There's going to be 5 regional centers supporting the main Secure Analytics Award. And as Mark Hasselkorn likes to say, it's community designed, community used, and community improved. And it's really going to be phenomenal. And then in addition, Secure Analytics, it's going to be really tremendous, because providing expertise to the community in the form of landscape analyses, risk modeling, and other data reporting that we just really think is so essential and needed immediately for all of you. So very excited about that. As you also know, the trust framework I presented at the last FDP Research Security Subcommittee panel on our new framework to review proposals for research security and national security concerns. It's going very well. We've had multiple road tests. We're engaging with the community, trying to build as much connective tissue, trust, and transparency as we possibly can on this new policy. So in addition, we have published a memo providing really the backstory of how and why we landed where we did, the specific criteria that we're looking at, parameters of why looking really at active appointments and positions rather than looking in the past. And really our focus on risk mitigation and getting to yes. So we're going to be developing also a one-pager, and we feel like there's a lot of information online. We did webinars, but we know that oftentimes just a one-pager that summarizes it is much easier for everybody to kind of get their head around. So we're going to be developing that along with some FAQs, so that so look out for those. And again, please, if there are questions, we do have an email specifically for the Trust Center. It's trust@nsf.gov. So we want to make sure that your questions are answered and nothing is feeling like an unknown to all of you. As Jim mentioned, thirdly, research security training modules, they are available. They were available starting January 31st of this year, but we are also looking at the possibility of revisions just to make sure that we're providing a full range of options to the community. As Jim mentioned, we have sponsored a IDA STIPI study to get feedback from the community, from all of you. The great news is the training modules that are currently on our website, they will fulfill the requirement, so you can stick with those. And now we're just exploring another option just to make sure that it fits the needs of all institutions out there. And lastly, I'll just mention our research security program. This is kind of forward looking to the future. This is, we had our workshop that now the workshop summary has been completed. It's online at that link actually here in the slide. I mean, this workshop really brought together tons of academic experts, international, domestic, government, industry leaders across many scientific disciplines and sectors. And really, they generated kind of 4 broad clusters of importance that were identified: national security, policy and governance, the research enterprise, and domestic and international collaboration. So now that that workshop has been completed, we're thinking about next steps, funding opportunities. So more to come on that very soon. And I think that is it for NSF. Next slide. Yep. over to you, Julie.
Sarah, thank you so much for that. I
Yeah.
just wanted to mention for everyone involved that I probably should have been more clear about when to use Q&A and raise hand. We are asking all questions come in via the Q&A function here in Zoom, and rather than raise hand. If we have time, we can do the raise hand at the end. But for now, if you could just put your questions in the Q&A function, that would be fantastic. Okay, Julie, please take it away for Department of Energy.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me back for this. And I brought Jeanette Sinkson with me this time. She is a senior advisor in our office and has a big responsibility in terms of developing policies, procedures, communication vehicles. So you will probably get to know her pretty well in the coming year. She will be, as we start to roll out different policies or implementation, she will be hosting webinars, listening sessions, and whatnot. So, and she's going to speak to a couple of the slides, but just wanted to also acknowledge Jeanette. So thank you for having us both. Next slide. And so just to start, so I am, and hopefully most of you are familiar with the ARTES office. So I'm the director for DOE's Office of Research, Technology, Economic Security. It is a new office. It was stood up last year, but we are still in the process of staffing up, and building our infrastructure. And I will continue to call us a new office until we have permanent furniture and a website. So hopefully that will happen very soon, but has not happened yet. Meanwhile, we are trying to take a lot of different actions to get more guidance out to the community to understand what it is that DOE is doing when it comes to research, technology, economic security. Our portfolio of what we fund under financial assistance is very large. It goes all the way from fundamental research all the way up to deployment of off-the-shelf, say renewable technologies like solar panels. With that, we have to build tools when it comes to research, technology, economic security that can hit on those various areas. A lot of what we're seeing, like with the CHIPS and Science Act, with NSPM 33, is really focused on R&D. And commonly we do get questions like, wait, where is this requirement coming from? Part of that is some of the requirements for the demonstration and deployment are going to look slightly different than what we have in for the R&D space. We are trying to harmonize those so that there is still some consistency, but there are just different types of aspects with those projects that we need to get more specific information with regard to those. For example, if you've got a grid project where there's going to be certain grid connections, we're wanting to know who's participating on those projects, what kind of access they're going to get, because it's not just about the sensitivity of, say, the research. In this case, it's more about the access to critical energy infrastructure and just trying to address those. And we do see, for example, universities being engaged in across our portfolio. So again, understanding that there might be some nuances when you're looking at participation in, say, a deployment project or demonstration project that might look a little different in terms of the tools that we're using for ARTES purposes. Next slide. So just as a reminder, the office, and for folks that might not be familiar with our office, we are largely charged with developing the department's due diligence process, risk assessment, and then implementing that for what is considered to be the higher risk projects. We do build in a technology aspect to that. We're looking at the sensitivity of a technology to determine whether that needs to go through the ARTES office review process. Otherwise, a lot of the review, say the current and pending support disclosures and whatnot, will happen at the program office. We're also responsible for information sharing within the department, and that is to build awareness across the department in terms of ARTES risks. And then also communications and outreach. And so what I'm expecting in the next year, that you will see a lot more engagement from our office externally as we've built internally our infrastructure. we're going to be hoping to host more webinars, listening sessions on various things that are coming up. Next slide, please. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is we do have this, in addition to the ARTES office, separately, we have an ARTES policy working group. Some of the feedback that we've received from the community is that different program offices doing things differently. So we are looking to build more consistency in how the different program offices are implementing different requirements. And so this is a working group. I'm the chair. We have Jennifer Mahalangapa from GC and Jeremy Eisen, who are also chairs on that working group. And then we have members from across DOE so that we can build in the buy-in from across the program offices. The one thing I wanted to clarify is I think some folks may have walked away from this thinking that we were going to have, 20 new different requirements for DOE outside. A lot of this is really just how are we going to implement NSPM 33, come up with that, like what does that look like on the inside? How are we implementing things that are specific to DOE? We have certain other statutory requirements when it comes to research security. So how are we going to implement that? How are we implementing research security at the national labs? So it's not intended to look like we're, hey, we've got NSPM 33 and now DOE is throwing in, 20 more new things. This is really just to get more consistency within the department on the things that we're required to implement. Next slide, please. And one of the things that you will see coming up, hopefully soon, is some guidance, and you will see some terms and conditions in the funding opportunity announcements and in awards related to this requirement. I should say a prohibition that we received in the FY24 appropriations that says DOE cannot fund an entity of concern. So, and then on the right-hand side of the slide that talks about the definition of an entity of concern. I highly doubt that there's any universities or, domestic organizations that would fall in that definition, but where this could pop up is there is a requirement to flow this down. So we do see, multi partner projects with lots of different types of entities. And so this would be flown down to the subrecipients. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette Singson. She has been, as part of the ARTES policy working group, leading a lot of the internal groups as far as the implementation for NSPM 33 and the CHIPS and Science Act. So Jeanette, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you everyone for having me here today. Look forward to talking to you more over the course of the next year or so. So a lot of people have been talking about our common form implementation across the various agencies. So for DOE, how we are doing this, you can see here on this slide. We are planning to require ORCID ID starting in May 2025, like our colleagues at NIH. And the difference that you'll see between the DOE forms and what you may see at NSF or NIH or the other agencies is we have two changes to our certification language. So we are relying on certification language that we've been using in DOE since 2022 at this point, where the person who is certifying acknowledges that the information that they are giving on the certification is material to our funding decision. So you'll see that a little bit different when you get that pop-up. Another thing we're doing with our certification is in our effort to reduce the burden on the community, since you already have to submit the current and pending support forms, we're putting the certification for that training requirement the research security training requirement from CHIPS into the certification of the common form as well. So you will see that coming up in the future if you apply to any of our FY25 notices of funding opportunity. In terms of implementation, again, we're trying to make this as seamless as possible for you. So we're jumping on to the May 2025 timeline that you've seen in some of the other agencies. We do have to, go through our own PRA process and all that. So it is dependent on that, but we are targeting May of 2025. And then we are also excited we've had conversations with the Science CV group about getting DOE's forms into that platform. So you'll have your one location that you go to for a number of the agencies to produce these common forms. One other thing that I don't have on this slide, but since our colleagues at NSF touched on the research security program requirements, I wanted to mention that as part of the OSTP groups, we are working on these requirements for DOE as well. We have an internal working group that's coordinating, and then we're also planning to coordinate with the other groups via the memorandum of agreement that Sarah mentioned. And we are very much committed to reducing burden where we can. So we want to put you all in a better position to comply with the requirements. So we're really taking a hard look at what the requirements will be and how to make it as easy as possible for you to certify. One thing that is perhaps unique to DOE, because we do have a lot of for-profit applicants and recipients, is we are exploring to what extent we would have the research security program requirements extend to for-profit entities that meet a certain funding threshold as well. So more to come in the future on these topics. With that, I will turn it back over to Julie.
Thank you, Jeanette. Next slide, please. So I want to point out, DOE recognizes that our open and collaborative R&D enterprise is one of the US's greatest competitive advantages for the race for innovation. That recognition is built in to our approach to risk assessment. And we've openly shared that the ARTES office is developing an ARTES framework that can be publicly shared that talks about our risk assessment process and the risk factors that we consider. The intent is to have consistency with DOE's review process, and also to be able to facilitate open conversations when risks are identified. That effort is being done in close coordination with the ARTES policy working group, and we're also working across DOE's many program offices so that we can secure agreement on the framework and to get a strong commitment for mitigating risks. So as we develop these different tools, and public guidance, feedback from the community is really important to ensure that we have the right size requirements to address the different parts of DOE's portfolio. And we are seeking to align with other agencies' frameworks. With that said, our framework is not ready for publication yet, but in an effort to provide some transparency, we've included this slide that talks about our overall principles for evaluating ARTES risk within the department and the things that the department finds important. We also, the next slide talks about the risk factors. So when the framework is posted, we will follow up with webinars and various listening sessions. But just wanted to give you these two slides, and if you can just jump to the next slide. And so I'm not going to go into great detail because I want to make sure my colleagues have enough time for their presentations, but wanted you to have these two slides to be able to walk away from to understand what our risk assessment process includes. And we hope to be able to publish the framework in the coming, hopefully weeks, months, soon, so that we can have further discussions on that. And so with that said, if you want to jump to the next slide. And Jeanette, I'll let you take this one, please.
All right, great. So I do want to let everyone know about a few resources to get in contact with us. So we do have, as you see on the left here, we have a new email inbox for the community. So if you have questions, if you have concerns, please reach out to us at that artesinfo@hq.doe.gov. We are also working on a new website. As Julie said, this will help launch us into a real, not a new office anymore once we have everything up and running. So you can see the current address is there on the right. It will redirect to the new site once it is up and running, and we hope to have lots of resources posted there for you eventually, including various frameworks, Q&As. This is where we will also have the links to sign up for webinars and listening sessions and all of that good stuff. So keep that in your bookmark and hopefully come visit us there. With that, thank you so much for your time, and I will turn it back over to Pam.
Jeanette, thank you so much. You're a great addition to our team, our federal panelist team. With that, we will, I think, switch over to Bindu. And I think Bindu wanted to talk to us without slides and share her input. And we're always interested in hearing what's going on with DoD. Bindu.
Yeah, thank you guys all so much. I appreciate it. I learned a lot from my, despite the fact that we all hear from each other a reasonable amount in like various federal stuff.
Hey, Pamela, can you hear her?
I can't hear any.
Bindu, yeah, Bindu, I think we might have lost you. I think we might have lost you. Do you want to try to disconnect and reconnect? And maybe we can take a
Or turn off the video.
Yeah, or turn
Yeah.
off the video and see if that'll work. So I think it sounded like the audio isn't working either. So well, I'm sure that Bindu will be right back. But maybe while we're waiting for her, we'll go ahead and take a question, and then oh, I think she's coming back in now, so we're all good. So go ahead, Bindu. So.
Yeah, apologies for that. I guess what I was going to try to say is that I'm going to leave this primarily for us to have a conversation, to answer any questions. I just wanted to give you a couple of quick thoughts before we jump to that direction. The first is that that one of the things that we are trying to do is make sure that the security community, the security research community, is in line with the civilian science organizations in general. And that is, believe it or not, a harder topic than you might imagine. So Jason Day, who would normally be here and providing you the specific updates on what's going on in terms of policymaking within the department, is not here today because I asked him to represent me instead in Stockholm at a NATO panel, because NATO is taking up this question of research security. And one of the things that we saw is that it was wandering off in a different direction than the interagency, the civilian science funding agency discussions that I think are primarily being headed up by Rebecca Kaiser and the NSF, but the State Department and NSF
We seem to be having trouble with Bindu's connection today. See if she comes back here. Well, while we're waiting for Bindu's connection to be restored, maybe I'll just take the moment to start with one of the questions, and then we'll end up with, of course, questions and answers after Bindu is complete with her remarks as well. And this is usually my signal for Bindu just to log right back on, so and be available to us. But Jean, I just wanted to say to you, first of all, thank you so much for changing that initial date for the FFDR. I think that helped so many of us. Both as we were trying to get used to the new process, but also because that date can be challenging for those of us that have a federal fiscal or have a institutional fiscal year of July 1. So we really also appreciate your opportunity to listen. We know you're already doing that in terms of hearing what might be a good cycle going forward. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Again, if we're imposing a requirement that makes it super challenging on our recipient community, that's not doing us any favors either. What we're looking for is information that meets the statutory requirement, that's accurate, current, and complete. And if we're picking a time frame that is just really hard for you to feel comfortable about making that certification, we know that's a problem. So thank you for those words, Pamela. And we really are serious about picking a date that works the best. It will never please anyone, I can guarantee you, but we're going to do our best to try.
Oh, great, thank you. And with that, I think we have Bindu back. So please go ahead, Bindu.
I am going to keep my video off because something seems to be going on with my system back here. Okay, so again, NATO, we are trying to make sure that the civilian science agencies are connected appropriately with the with what's going on in our civilian side. The second thing I wanted to sort of say is that internally in DoD, the issue that seems to be coming, there are a couple of issues that seem to be coming up that may be of relevance to you. The first is that we have heard from many of you about where you're seeing pain points in the decision matrix. And it's not that we haven't seen them, it is that we're in the process of having these discussions with our components, so Army, Navy, Air Force specifically, and DARPA, about why they're making the choices they're making and where the alignment and misalignment is with the requirements and desires of the department as a whole. So those are happening. Those of you that have asked for assistance, please be advised that we will be getting back to you. We are beginning to narrow down on where the issues are and how to make sure that the different components are assessing risk at least in a similar way to each other. So thank you for the questions. Thank you for the challenges that you've put forward, because they have been really helpful for us to understand at a deeper level what the issues are that we're working on. And then with that, let me jump to, so I think we're doing all right on the implementation of our risk matrix. I mean, there's bumps along the road like we expected, but I think that the thing that I wanted to share with this group is that the issues that we are seeing coming forward from Congress next is about this question of collaboration. That seems to be the issue that has popped up in terms of what we are getting asked about and how we are getting asked to deal with. So collaboration is being evaluated, or it's being identified through co-authorship. So that is in and of itself not a good metric for collaboration, but leaving that aside, I think that one of the issues that we are running into is that research co-authorships are causing us some fun on the Hill right now. And most of the amendments that we are seeing coming forward for NDAA are to deal with those co-authorships. Now, DoD is pushing back very strongly against some of these proposed legislative solutions, because what it is doing is it's making co-authorship seem completely undesirable as opposed to a flag. And so, you know, I think that for you, I think it is just, I want to bring this up in case you are watching the legislation that is, or the proposed legislation that's coming out. They are all wandering around this question of, is it okay to produce papers with researchers in countries of concern? The DoD's position is that generally, yes, it is, because we want to be involved in research wherever it's happening. It's just not a settled debate or discussion in Congress. And I did want to I did want to flag that for people as we're going forward. So inside the department, we are trying to establish our making sure that we're ironing out the kinks between the different parts of the department in terms of research of our risk matrices. We have a new version of the risk matrix that will probably be published this fall. We're going through the final review on it. Nothing weird in it. You're not going to be stressed out about it. I promise you that. Much of it incorporates issues or questions that have come to us from you and from the community at large. And some things that have been too hard for our own people to manage. So I don't think there's going to be any surprises in there, but a new version of the risk matrix will be coming out this fall. And so with that, let me turn it back over to Pamela, and I apologize for the state of my internet connection.
We have all been there, Bindu, so we understand that part. So we're going to move on now to the question and answer phase, and we're going to try and do this a couple of different ways. So some of you have raised hands. So if you're interested, again, in doing that, if you could go ahead and raise your hand. Sarah needs to be able to unmute you to be able to change your settings, basically, for you to participate in that way. So Jim and I will start with a couple of the regular questions, and then we'll try to get to anyone who cares to raise their hand and participate in that way. Jean, my first question is for you. My question really has to do with Section 117 reporting and FFDR reporting. We know that you have there are different statutory requirements right now that that you each have to follow. I was wondering, and that you've talked to each other quite a bit, but is there any opportunity, maybe even for institutions, to lobby through our representatives, for example, to get regulatory changes to bring those synced up so that it would be easier for both you and for them?
Well, I mean, and Sarah can absolutely confirm this. We did spend a lot of time really trying to make sure we were in sync with them. It's really when the questions came in and people wanted to parse, well, what does NSF want versus what does 117 want? And we, Department of Education want. And we worked really closely with our counsel's office to say, okay, now wait a minute, there is a divergence here. Your language does differ from their language. And there's a reason why they need certain things that we may not need, perhaps. And so you do come to that terrible position of, we don't need information, but we'd ask for it. Is that the right thing to do? So in terms of, I mean, we did our very, very best to really take a perspective of, we want to be as in sync with education as we can, but at the same time, we need what we need versus they need what they need. And so in terms of ever responding to a, should I tell you to go to the Hill, that's your decision to make. Right. We can't tell you to go there, but I do understand, particularly when theirs is 250, all countries, ours is 50K, countries of concern, and the data elements are complex, intermediaries, agents, directly, indirectly. So we definitely hear what you're saying. Yeah. And the only thing we don't want to put ourselves in the position in is getting a lot of information that we neither don't want nor will use. Yeah. So Sarah, is there anything more you want to add to that?
No, I think you captured it perfectly, Jean. Okay. Yeah, nothing bad.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I promise I won't go to my representatives that Jean.
No, don't say Jean said come to
no, I promise I won't do that. So. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, Bindu, speaking of going to the representatives, your comment on the collaboration, but I think we had hoped that that was a dragon that had been slain a bit, especially with all the clarification of the importance in the research security programs to make sure that there aren't discrimination issues. You all have worked really hard to say good collaboration is critical. Two questions. How worried are you? And should we have conversations with our federal relations staff to help members of Congress understand the value of international collaboration?
So I'm going to just ditto Jean on that second question. Should you have conversations with your federal relations staff? It's certainly not my place to suggest or not suggest that, but let me tell you the issue that we're dealing with. The issue we're dealing with is the following, that there have been, remember, analytics is a very, very powerful thing, right? Like analytical tools can be very, very powerful, but they're dealing with big data. And that can suggest trends that may or may not be true. And you absolutely need somebody who knows what they're looking for to sort of do an overlay. So some of the stuff that we've been seeing going around is this question of how many co-authored papers are there between the DoD, or something that was funded by the DoD, and a entity of concern, so something on the 1286 list. And the numbers that came back were, seemed high. But, one of the things that we've done is we've gone and looked into those cases, and we've sort of understood, well, why, and this is all, by the way, pre any issues that, pre-2018, pre-2019 kind of collaboration. So first of all, we're looking retrospectively, because big data often does look retrospectively. So that's one of the challenges. And the other thing that we're finding is that collaboration and co-authorship are very far from the same thing. So if you have a student at Yale who is, who's funded on a DoD project, let's say that he or she takes a job at one of these institutions in China, and is there when the final paper is written, right? That shows up as a co-authorship and a collaboration, and it is completely legit on all fronts. So it's not actually a good proxy for collaboration or for dangerous collaborations. There are other times that we've seen these co-authorships, and we have been completely aware, because as we have tried to indicate to Congress that that there are sometimes very good reasons why we collaborate, why we encourage collaborations with where the state of the art is, and the state of the art may or may not be in the United States.
Great, thank you. Very helpful. Pamela? And I think Bindu might have froze again, but
Yeah,
Pamela?
so thank you. Thanks,
States.
Jim.
We've seen examples of that where Department of Defense. So I think that the issue that we are dealing with is that the things that are easy to measure may not be the right things to measure, and we're seeing that on Congress with the co-authorship question. Yeah, I think what you don't want, I mean, I think co-authorships are a fine thing to look at, but a prohibition is worrisome. And I think that there's at least some appetite from some members to go in that direction.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Thank you, Bindu.
I think we have just a technical clarification from one participant. And Sarah, this might be for you. This goes back to being a $50 million covered institution. And the question this person is having is, will we be notified? Are we supposed to self-determine? We know you're consulting with these various lists, but will we be pointed to a list and we're supposed to use that? What do you recommend?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, we've been asked the question a few times now. I mean, technically we aren't required to make anything available, but we get it that the community is searching for a resource. So I don't think that we would be notifying an institution that they would meet that requirement, but I think that we would do our best to see if we can maybe make a resource available, and that could be consulted. And we're also even actually, Pamela, Jim, it's something that We even thought there might be something even FDP offers that we might be able to leverage. So yeah, we can talk about that. But yeah, we're just trying to explore all options and try to make it available for the community. But probably it wouldn't be like an individual notification. But more to come on that. Hopefully by the next FDP, we'll definitely have an update on that.
Thank
But
you.
we know it is a great desire of institutions because as I mentioned, we had people submitting reports that didn't even have to submit reports because they're like, I don't know, and I don't want to be caught off balance. So it is something we are aware, definitely, that we've been asked for it multiple times.
Thank you. Jim?
Great. There's a question. Is it safe to assume that universities do not need to develop temporary processes or systems to have individual faculty certify on each current and pending affirming not participation in a Malign foreign talent program? Or can we wait until NIH adopts Science CV? Or should we revise our current language now?
So I think that I believe it was Sarah actually that addressed that, right? That at the certification level at the institution that we're looking to figure out how we can streamline that effort. So that's not just an NIH question, that's a question for all of the federal agencies. And so more to come.
Okay, great, thank you.
We had a question about the DOE certification for completing research security training. So Julie or Jeanette, is that certification going to be required prior to an OSTP guideline for when institutions need to be compliant with the requirement?
Yeah.
So I'm happy to take this one, Pam. So the general counsel reading from DOE is that these are actually two different certification requirements. So you're absolutely right. The research security program certification at the institutional level, that is something that is on an OSTP timeline. It's in those guidelines. You know, it's something like 18 months from the date that the agencies publish their policy, something along those lines. So pretty far out, right? On the other hand, the research security training requirement for covered individuals who are applying to an R&D award, that is in a different section of the CHIPS requirement. And NSF was so great to put out these research security training modules. There are 4 of them. They're on the NSF website. So what DOE would envision is that the community has the 4 modules as their resource, and we would love if everybody gets up to speed and has this common language to discuss research security through these training modules. So there's nothing for institutions that is going into effect before the OSTP timeline.
Thank you. Jim?
Great, we've had one very patient person, Teresa Hammett, with her hand raised. Sarah, can you let Teresa ask her question?
Oh, she lowered her hand. What was her name again?
She lowered her hand.
Teresa?
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
Tammy? Yeah, okay. Okay. You can speak now. Tammy.
You're on mute, Tammy. I'm going to ask a quick question, Tammy, while you unmute. Just a quick, hopefully this is a quick question. Sarah, you, I think in your slide talked about coordination of the implementation by agencies of the research security program, right? I think there was something that in the announcement that within 6 months agencies were supposed to do something. Does that sound right? And I don't know if there's anything you can say about the desired level of coordination. Is it those on this screen? Is it broader? Is it something that you think is going to be really helpful to us, or a continued challenge? Because I know there's agency requirements. Why is everybody laughing? Michelle and Jean.
No, and I also just wanted to clarify one thing, the 2 questions ago. I mean, what we're working on doing across the agencies is setting up a central certification for exactly what you just said, Jim, the Research Security Program Standards certification, not the Malign Foreign Talent Recruitment certification. That is agency by agency. So just to clarify that. And then, you know, I mean, Rebecca, as you know, she's leading the effort, and you know, I think I don't want to speak for everyone on the screen, but actually, you know, I think her co-chairs and her have been speaking about this, the co-chairs of the research security, the NSTC research security subcommittee. And now we're starting to reach out to other agencies to continue to socialize the prospect of this. We just talked about it recently at an interagency meeting broader than just the co-chairs. So, you know, I think there's general receptivity, but I don't want to speak definitively for any of the other agencies. But yeah, I mean, the goal is we are very cognizant that this create a massive headache for the community to have multiple certifications, and then that might create a little bit of space for, you know, more divergence on the requirements than hope for. So we're really trying to do our best to coordinate among the agencies and make sure that we can be as consistent as we possibly can. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Sarah, I think that Tammy Widenstein would like to ask a question. I think we may have unmuted someone else before.
Tammy should be unmuted.
Okay. Tammy?
I saw that she had unmuted previously.
Oh, okay. So that
But
was,
then now she's muted again. So wait, let me.
okay, sure.
So I actually did not have a question, but my Zoom has gone completely crazy and all I have is a black screen.
Oh, here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Tammy. So I know Teresa, I think Hammett was on before too, wanted to ask a question if she's still on.
I don't believe so.
Okay, okay, well, thank you. Then we'll go on with other. Jim, do you want to pick another question?
Looking at the questions now.
Okay.
Jim, I see one related to co-authorship. Do you want me to talk to that while you're identifying another
Please.
one? Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is and just to clarify, this attendee indicated that we made the point of saying that co-authorships are not a risk factor. I just want to clarify that definitely we are not saying they are not a risk factor. I mean, in everything there's a risk with everything. There is never zero risk. However, because we are NSF and because there is a huge spectrum of co-authorship, you know, there can be 100 co-authors on a publication. There can be 2. Those 2 co-authors have a 10-year history of authoring publications together. That's different than one person being cited. Rebecca and I and many others are talking about kind of finding out more about co-authorship. How can we determine really how to assess risk as it relates to co-authorship? And because we don't feel comfortable at this point making any assertions or coming to any conclusions around co-authorship, it is why we are not currently including it in our trust framework. So I just want to clarify that because again, you know, every agency has a different risk tolerance. DoD is mission oriented, not to mention all the different components. It's so much, you know, a lot of complication. We at NSF, it's, you know, we're really funding basic research and curiosity driven, not thinking about a mission. So I just want to clarify that. So, and I do understand that makes it challenging. I'm not trying to say in any way, shape or form that is going to make it easy for you, but I do want to just highlight that distinction between NSF versus DoD. Bindu, do you want to add anything to that?
Look, Sarah's absolutely right. We have different risk profiles on for the different agencies. That being said, I think co-authorship as a standalone is really just not a very good risk factor. And so we don't anticipate, unless we are encouraged to by Congress, we do not anticipate that being a standalone risk factor, even for DoD. What it can do, sometimes what it can do is the following. Like, let's say that you have a researcher, a PI that has been doing a lot of work with, over the years even, with a group that is known to be that is known to come from a problematic institution in let's pick, Russia, right? Let's say that you've been known to do that. And again, these institutions that are problematic are out there. They are not like something that you have to guess at. We've provided the list. Let's say that you have a PI that does a lot of work with them. We're not saying that a co-authorship with that institution, again, absent help from Congress, is by itself an issue, right? And it certainly doesn't mean that we're going to say decline your proposal. But what it might mean is that as a precondition, I mean, there will likely be some kind of mitigation, and oftentimes that is the training. The research security training that sort of says, one of the things, as I think we've mentioned over and over again, the thing that we're trying to get to is that everybody understands the motivations of everybody that they're collaborating with and doing work with, and the whole system as a whole. And so, what we don't want is your PI, a PI that is funded by the DoD, to show up as completely unwitting collaborators with somebody whose motivations may or may not be suspect, but they don't give them the opportunity to understand that, right? So a mitigation factor on something like that might be a requirement on our end, that before you get a grant from this individual, to this individual, if you're going to maintain them as a PI, a bare minimum mitigation factor might be that they have to take the training, as an example, right? And so, we do things like this. So sometimes the co-authorship raises the risk for us. It doesn't mean that we're going to say no. It does mean that we're going to provide you as much information as we can so that you're aware of the issues as we see them.
Thank you, Bindu. We're almost out of time, so Jim and I wanted to offer each speaker kind of a last minute, if you have any final comments that you would like to share with us. I'll start with you, Sarah.
Or how we can help, how FTP can help.
Or how FTP could,
right?
that's right, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm just seeing questions come in about the FFDR requirement. So Jean, I just think that we welcome all kinds of input on that. Again, is the Secure Center standing up? We're doing what we can to be meeting with the community, but we're only, a handful of people. Once the Secure Center stood up, we're really hoping that that's what's going to open the communication. We're going to be getting a lot more feedback on a whole different streamlined level. And so just really looking forward to that, because in FTP, I think you guys are great. You guys are always such an amazing resource. But right now I can't think of anything on the spot. My apologies, but I'm sure I'll think of it at my Friday meeting. Okay.
Anybody, I'll turn it open so you can join if you want to, but not have to. So anyone else?
Just keep those comments and feedback coming. They've been instrumental, at least to us at NSF.
Thank you, Jean.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only other thing that I'd like to add is that we received several questions offline that we'd like to provide to you, Pam and Jim, on behalf of NIH, so that the community understands our position on some of these questions that have been asked today.
Excellent. Thank you. We would welcome that. So.
And I just wanted to say thank you from DOE for including us. We really appreciate the opportunity, and I guess repeat what others have said. The feedback is really helpful. And so if you get additional questions after this, if you wouldn't mind sharing those with us, because it really is helping us build what we are trying to get in place, and really look forward to having more opportunities to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. So, and again, welcome to that. So, okay, so the final thing is, don't forget, there's another session tomorrow, the secure session from the Research Security Subcommittee, that's going to be all things secure. So we really hope everybody will attend that as well. We are so thankful that you joined us once again. You have just all been so terrific. Whenever we reach out to you, you're there. And FDP, and we know, you're as much members of FDP as us, but just from the institutional side of it, we so value and appreciate everything you bring. And I know you've answered an enormous number of questions today, whether in your presentation or through the Q&A, and we're most appreciative. So thank you.
Thanks
Bye-bye,
all.
everybody. Take
Great
care.
seeing you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.